So I'm Ryan. I'm basically going to pick up where Jan left off talking about blockchains. So let's start with an overview of what exactly a cryptographer is from the perspective of everyday people. So when I started off doing crypto, people would say, what do you do? What do you do in grad school? I say, I'm a cryptographer. And they would guess, oh, you search for big prime numbers, you do some sort of nerdy math stuff. It's kind of sort of along the right lines. I sometimes had people say, oh, you must be doing this spy stuff, something to do with Snowden, that's what you're doing. One time I had a really puzzled person saying, I thought you were a computer science student, you make maps? So that was pre-2016-ish. More recently, everybody's converged on the same answer. Oh, you're a cryptographer, you do Bitcoin. The problem is that as a cryptographer, Bitcoin isn't very interesting cryptographically. Everything it's built from sort of predates my time as a computer scientist. So the hash function it uses is the most modern thing. This is SHA-256 from back in 2001, and I'm not a hash function expert. DSA signatures are the signature scheme they use. That was standardized back in '93, and they didn't standardize it until it had been well studied long before '93. I was pretty young at the time. Merkle trees are a really cool trick used in blockchains to aggregate all the data into blocks. I wasn't even born yet when these things were studied. Blockchains themselves were proposed when I was, just starting elementary school. Most of the really interesting cryptographic problems in all of these things are sort of solved before I came on the scene. So the predicament is, as a cryptographer, how can I get in on this crypto thing? And it turns out that there is one nice way to get in. I'm actually a cryptographer who focuses specifically on privacy. And Bitcoin is horrendous from a privacy perspective. There are many, many issues. So if you think about it, Bitcoin's a lot like cash. It's money, except unlike cash, it lacks anonymity. When you use Bitcoin, every transaction you make ends up on a public ledger and can be traced back to you. So who's transferring money to whom is readily available on this blockchain, and it's not backed by any sort of government, so the value is suspect, but that's not as interesting to me. And Bitcoin's a lot like credit cards as well, in the sense that every transaction is sort of reported to some central place, except unlike credit cards, there's no privacy regulations that prevent you or I from looking at everybody else's credit card transactions. So you end up with this situation where everything everybody does becomes publicly available, and it's kind of creepy. So I'm focusing mostly on the anonymity and privacy regulation. How do we mitigate these things and get some sort of privacy with Bitcoin? So there's two particular problems we've been looking at. One is when you make a transaction. So this guy here is at engagementrings.com looking to buy an engagement ring. As soon as he does this, say he pays with Bitcoin, he posts a transaction to the blockchain up there that basically says that this guy just sent $1,000 to engagementrings.com. Unfortunately, his wife notices on the blockchain, hey, my husband or my boyfriend just spent $1,000 at an engagement ring website, woohoo, and the surprise is being spoiled. So we've been looking at approaches to solve this problem. How do you actually make these transactions without your wife knowing you're about to pop the question? And the other thing we've been looking at relates to something called thin client. So the blockchain is this massive list of every transaction ever made. It's quite a few gigabytes at this point. And you're supposed to have the whole thing. So lots of clients don't actually have the whole thing. They run what's called a thin client. So this guy over here is a thin client, and he's wondering, is this transaction I made yesterday posted? How much money do I actually have when you look at all the transactions that have come in and out? And the way this typically happens is you go to something called a full node and you say, hey, here's a list of every wallet, every transaction that I care about. Can you sort of total up the transactions that have happened and tell me what I'm worth? And then the full node is supposed to look through the data and tell you all of your transactions. There have actually been lots of high profile incidences of people going, how much am I worth? And the full node goes, you're worth $1 million. And then by the next day, they're worth nothing because somebody realized if I break into this guy's computer, I get $1 million because he's got the keys for these Bitcoin. So we've been looking at these two problems. I don't have much time, so just give you the really short version. We're looking at specially made anonymity systems that can provide really good anonymity by having moderate latency, and something called private information retrieval to do that second fetching the transaction.